Hello, dear guests, dear colleagues. I'm happy to welcome you here. It's nice to see you here. Thank you for coming. I would like to give the floor to the General Director of Russian State Library, Vadim Duda. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, friends. We are really happy to welcome you here at this conference. It's great that it has happened. You probably remember that we couldn't have this conference last year, so it's great to be together finally. This is our 5th conference. Over 20 countries take part in this conference. We have about 200 participants. And the first thing that I wanted to mention is that, this is the 5th conference. It means that we are going to have the top grade, the 5. It's great to see you here, and it's great to have such a warm and friendly atmosphere. And we do deserve it because, we are doing a very important work. Yesterday we had an important event. We had lots of mass media, lots of journalists. It was a handover of Codex Marianus from restorators to the library. So I think it was a very important thing. And such events should be noticed and should be recognized. And I'm sure that the state should support our work because we are doing an extremely important work for the country. I would like to share some of our projects. We are going to get a grant, hopefully, because we already applied for this grant for 10-year programs, and I hope that the country, that the government will support us, because it's really important that we get the support from the state. I would like to wish you all the success in your work because the work that you do can never take place online because this live communication, talk to the masters, it's extremely important. So it's great to see you here. I would like to wish you all sorts of revelations, new discoveries. Please get to know each other. Have a nice day. And now we are going to have a speech from the Ministry of Culture of the Russian Federation. I was entrusted with this speech on behalf of the Ministry of Culture of the Russian Federation. So it is for all the participants that take part in the 5th International Conference Document Restoration. Dear colleagues, dear friends, on behalf of the Ministry of Culture of the Russian Federation, we welcome you here, and we send our congratulations on the opening of the 5th International Scientific and Practical Seminar, Document Restoration, Conservatism and Innovation. Preserving the heritage of the country is an extremely important area in the public policy, and it's symbolic that you having this event, the biggest professional forum of the specialists that brought together the best specialists from different restoration centers all over the world. Thanks to your work, unique pieces of art helps us understand the reality of different times. And they have such an importance, such big cultural significance. So I would like to wish you inspiration and achievements in your profession. Olga Kirillova, the Deputy of the Minister of Culture of the Russian Federation. I would like now to invite the General Director of Russian Art Restoration Center, named after Grabar, Alexander Sergeyev. Dear colleagues, good morning. I'm happy to welcome you here. So we are celebrating 150th anniversary since the birthday of Igor Grabar. So we prepared a lot of materials dedicated to this anniversary. We found a lot of new documents and letters in the archive, and we collected a big body of works. You know, sometimes we think that the national protection system, restoration work, the documentation and record keeping is something that has always been part of museum life. But it turned out that on the borderline between the 19th and 20th century, there was no system like that. Yes, there was an emperor's organization that tried to regulate this process, but overall there was no systematic approach to that, no national system. So it's, you know, in 1918, Grabar managed to find a common language with Lunacharsky, and that's how they founded this system to protect the cultural heritage of this country. I would be happy to say that they set up over 200 departments to protect monuments with 500 people working there, and there were over 500 artworks that have been recorded and registered, and this included documents, artworks, paintings, books, and other things. And I wanted to draw your attention to this fact that Vadim mentioned. It's very important to have the public system, the government system that should support this work and protect the national legacy. So the system that was established in 1918 was very important, and now we continue this work, and this is one of the most important factors. So the state support is the main factor that can help us protect the cultural heritage. And I would like to say that this is a complex system. It's like an architectural building. So it's very important to have right people. So I would like to thank you, because you are the people that do very important work. And I'm sure that many people will watch our conference on the internet. Some people will use these documents that we are discussing here. So you do this work, and you are instrumental in protecting cultural heritage. I think that restoration is the core of this work, because it organizes this work and directs it and guides it in the right direction. So it's very symbolic to have this conference at the Russian National Library, at the Russian State Library. So it means that we are doing a great job, we are moving in the right direction, and we hope that we will get together and consolidate our cooperation. So we'll continue to improve our cultural heritage, and we'll do our best to bring back all the works that have to be available. And this is the 5th conference, and it means that the previous conferences have been extremely relevant, and I'm sure that this conference and all the future conferences will be as rich in content as before. And thank you for your work, thank you for your contribution, because you came here to discuss very important issues related to the protection of our legacy. We would like to change the protocol. You know, we have been working at the ministry for 10 years, right? Yes. And I wanted to mention this thing. would you agree with me that the attitude of the officials has changed to our work because they started to think about the details. They began to understand the essence of our work. So this gives us great hope because, as you said, we can see that the state cares about it. Like 10 years ago, it was very different. You know, as Gumilov used to write, you know, you breathed in this rain for a long time, so you can't believe in the bright sunlight. But now it feels like people start to believe in the sunlight. And I guess these processes include many different factors, and there are many different layers. And you were right when you mentioned that the attitude of officials has changed because we were working together at the ministry. And I know that there were many officials. Many people hate this word, you know, bureaucrats, and yeah, they hate these people, you know, bureaucracy. It's pretty tough. Yeah, but like you said, they looked back to earth. They became more mundane now, and they are moving in the right direction. They focus on the right issues, and I hope that this will improve in the future. You know, people understand the importance of protection of culture, of restoration, and it's great that they are willing to support this, and I hope that they will be more effective in this. Well, I can't speak for all, but I'm sure Vadim plays a very important role and does a great job, because I can imagine how much work he has done. And it's great to see that the library has received such a great support. Thank you.
I would like to, I hope you will agree that we all deserve something much better, more investments and more support. Thank you very much, colleagues. And so now, with your welcome, with your agreement, I would like to continue. Once again, good morning. That today's 5th international seminar could be the 6th one, but the COVID pandemic forced us to cancel this workshop. We really were deeply sorry, but we really were forced to do it, and we were right, as it turned out later. Of course, we have some limitations, because those problems that don't allow us to communicate freely, these are masks on our faces. This especially concerns our European colleagues who couldn't come to our master classes and programs. The situation there is more serious than ours. We can't welcome all the people here in the hall, all those who wanted to participate. And this is due to the limitations, but our intention to develop is limitless. So to all those who arrived, to the representatives, 190 organizations, museums, archives, and libraries from 22 countries, you see it by the flags, here from the Russian Federation, Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Ukraine, the Republic of Slovenia, France, Egypt, Qatar, India, Sweden, and other countries. To all those 375 people, including restaurators, restorers from the Russian State Library, who are going to connect with us online. I hope there will be a lot of viewers on the YouTube channel. Thanks a lot. Thank you for your participation, and I wish you the maximum involvement. These were very rich 3 days. We have a very rich tour program. Those who haven't registered yet, please don't delay and do it as quickly as possible. We don't have many vacancies. My special thanks go to our sponsors. We have 3 spots. Internet, Carl Zeiss, and Sova Technologies, 3 companies, joint stock companies. During the break time, you will be able to get acquainted with their posters on the right. And of course, my words of gratitude go to the Russian State Library and its staff, whose enthusiasm and professionalism made this workshop possible. Special thanks to the UPPS department, the Department of Conservation. So the welcoming part is ended with these words, and with this I would like to guide you to the working flow. Yesterday there was a very good and big ceremony of the presentation of the Marian Gospel. We had a lot of press presentation here, and you will find the broadcasting on our YouTube channel and other TV channels who broadcasted it and shot it. I would like to say very briefly before the presentation about the process of the restoration. And now I will very briefly say that it was a very laborious work, which we managed to do excellently. The results of this work, after completion of this session, you will be able to see in the exhibition hall on the ground floor. And now you will see a short roll, a short film, showing how the work was going on. Thank you. Please get involved. And now I give the floor to the first paper, the restoration of the 11th century Codex Marianus. I invite the painters and restorers of the highest category.
Good morning, colleagues. Let me share my presentation about our work related to the restoration of Codex Marianus, a unique monument of the Glagolitic writing, which was created in the 11th century, and it belongs to the Balkans. The researchers believe that this Codex Marianus is one of the oldest Slavonic manuscripts. It's one of the most complete codexes that was written in Glagolitic script, and it belongs to the collection of Viktor Grigorovich, who was a connoisseur of language arts, who was a scholar that studied Slavonic science and professor of Moscow and Kazan universities. He discovered this manuscript in a small monastery of Virgin Mary on Mount Athos, where it existed since the 14th century, and that's why this book is also known as Athonian manuscript or Grigorovichian manuscript. It came to the manuscripts department of the Russian State Library in 1887 as part of Grigorovich collection after Grigorovich's death. In fact, when it came to the museum, it didn't have the binding. It had 171 parchment sheets, and it was sold in 2 signatures. It lacked one section with the Gospel of Matthew, and it didn't have 2 sheets at the end of the codex. So the first 2 initial leaves of Matthew Gospels were found in the 19th century and are kept in Vienna National Library. The text of manuscript is written by small and round Glagolitic script in 1 column, and there are images of 3 evangelists, St. Mark, St. Luke, and St. John, headpieces and ornaments made in ink, printed with 2 colors, pink and green, with accompanying Cyrillic text. There are lots of marginalia on the margins of the manuscript, and it was written in the 14th century. In fact, Codex Marianus was studied in depth for the purpose of particular paleographic and grammatic features, with many works published about it. And there was a lot of interest by artists, historians, philologists, and that's why it makes it necessary to maintain its physical integrity and preservation. Today, in the time of digital copies, we can create the digital copies of the highest level. And of course, it's very important, but it doesn't cancel the importance of safekeeping the original that has existed over thousands of years. So the digital copy of this manuscript is kept at the manuscripts department of Russian State Library. And it's well known that in the 20th century there were no restoration or conservation works on it. Only in 2015 discussions started about the possibility of restoring this unique monument. So we highly appreciated the trust given to the restoration department, realizing all the responsibility. So we started to work with the manuscript, and our specialists, chemists and physicists studied it, and we did a lot of analysis focusing on codicological aspects, historical and physical peculiarities, and based on that research we actually made the following conclusions. The basis of the manuscript is parchment, made according to Byzantine traditions. That is, it has prominent features of the front and flesh sides and processed with a composition of egg white and flaxseed decoction, which gave the surface of the parchment gloss, elasticity, and retained molecular moisture in the structure. This method of dressing had both advantages as well as disadvantages. It was easier to write on it, but parchment tends to roll onto the front side under the climatic fluctuations, and almost all paints applied to its surface are non-waterproof and can be easily washed off. The main text of the manuscript was written in early ferro-gel brown ink, non-waterproof, and as a binder they used natural gum. The initial and headpieces were made using cinnabar, atacamite, indigo pigments mixed with whitewash. All sorts of margins, like notes, comments from different periods in the margins of the manuscript, are made with cinnabar, graphite and colored pencils. We can say with certainty that they are quite stable, with an exception of the green pigment, used in 2 headpieces on 2 miniatures and in 3 marginalia. The green pigment contains atacamite copper chloride, which behaves extremely aggressively towards the base, migrating to the opposite side and destroying parchment. The contamination accumulated over the 1,000-year existence of the manuscript was also investigated. Mycological analysis showed the absence of viable fungal structures, and due to the impregnation of parchment with a composition of plant and animal proteins, impurities do not penetrate deeply into its structure and are relatively easily removed mechanically from the surface of the sheets. The signatures are traditional Byzantine quaternions that consist of 4 double sheets. So the parchment sheets are folded face to face, flesh to flesh. And judging by the diamond-shaped notches in the root part of the sheet, the block was once sewn with a Byzantine string. The manuscript has not been restored before, but the first 4 and last signatures show signs of repair. In the lower spine of the signatures, we can see that there were some sheet breaks, and they were sewn over the edge with a thin strip of parchment. And the breaks on the first sheet of the manuscript were sewed with strips of thin parchment. Apparently, this manuscript hasn't had binding for a long time, since damage in the spine is possible only in the absence of its cover. Probably the signatures were sewn in pairs for the ease of use and not by chance, since the manuscript served as a model for copies in the monastery scriptoriums. It was connected into a block much later, possibly in the 19th century, in order to avoid the loss of signatures. Microscopic analysis of the threads showed that the threads connecting the signatures in 2 and the threads connecting the block were of different quality and time, and the method of binding signatures into a block was absolutely unsystematic and even chaotic, which also confirmed the assumption of a later connection of signatures into a block. Based on the research results, we developed a methodology that identified the sequence of restoration activities that included unstitching a block, photo records, dry mechanical cleaning of parchment, elimination of parchment deformations, selection of restoration materials and glue, restoration of parchment sheets, restoration of destroyed miniatures, block stitching, making exo-binding. And there were quite strong creases that was due to tightening, over-tightening. Especially this was seen in the first and the last signature. And the parchment sheets were difficult to open, had a lot of contamination, leaks, mechanical tears, and some fragments of parchment were lost. So we had to eliminate the deformation of parchment because it contributed to many negative factors. So that's why we pulled the block open and we took all the threads carefully out. We untied all the knots, recording the structures and all the patterns. So we started with removing the surface contamination, since this was not waterproof writing. We used rubber crumbs, cotton swabs, and brushes to remove all the contamination. We used also soft rubber. So the main task was to remove the deformation of parchment because it contributed to the erasure of the manuscript. And we used the methodology of distant moisturization. We used 4 layers of filter paper as well as gauze, and we made sure that the upper layer was dry. We used polyethylene film pressed on it under the load, and thus we moistened the sheets for about 20 minutes up to 1 hour. Then we used acid-free cardboard lined with filter paper. We put it in the press between filter paper and cloth. We kept changing them until the parchment was dry. Then the straightened sheets were put under the press with slight pressure to stabilize it. We used acid-free cardboard 1 millimeter thick to keep and maintain the size of the spine. It was very important to find the right adhesives. So at the moment, usually we use Japanese paper, and we had to follow special requirements. With regard to reversibility and durability, we used Japico restoration paper, as well as Japanese silk paper. We used 10% flour paste as an adhesive. While filling in the losses of parchment, we cut out Japanese paper according to the shape of the loss with adhesive applied to it, and such a patch was pasted to the parchment with minimal overlap, practically butt to butt. Large patches were fixed on top with Japanese silk cloth for better fastening to the base. Large tears of parchment were reinforced with thin Japanese paper, as a rule on both sides of the sheet. Small tears, folds, and weakened areas of the parchment were reinforced with Japanese silk. The parchment sheets, restored in this way, were placed in a press between the layers of cloth, then between the layers of filter paper, Holitex, and kept for stabilization for 2 weeks. After that, we trimmed the restoration edges. We put the sheets in signatures and used acid-free cardboard 1 millimeter thick, which was placed in the middle, and all these sections were put into the press under slight pressure. A particular difficulty occurred during the restoration of sheets with headpieces and miniatures painted with green paint which contained copper chloride, and the maximum degree of destruction of the base was observed on the miniature depicting Saint Luke. And it is known that exposure to moisture aggravates the process of destruction, and therefore for the restoration of sheets with headpieces and miniatures with green paint, we used 5% alcohol solution of Clusil G with remote moistening of the sheets. The fragments with green paint were covered with additional layers of filter paper in order to limit the ingress of moisture as much as possible. The loss of the base was also filled in by Japanese paper, butt to butt. Fallen out fragments and cracks of parchment were reinforced with the Japanese silk paper. Another difficulty during restoration was that the second, third, and fourth signatures of the manuscript during the previous repairs were fastened with thin strips of parchment in the lower spine, which broke and crumbled when the sheets were opened. After a detailed photographic record of the binding, they were removed, the sheets were restored and put into a signature. Using a parchment strip that matched in thickness and color, the binding was completely restored according to the original scheme. And in the same way, the binding of the last signature of the manuscript was restored in the upper spine. Thus, the block of the manuscript was restored and brought to a stable state. Then we stitched two signatures and then joined these signatures into a block. We can assume that the original manuscript was sewn by the string method, judging by the end piece, and it was probably bound according to Byzantine traditions. But anyway, we can only hypothesize about the original binding of Codex Marianus, the method of fastening the threads to the boards, the typology of end bands, clamps, the number of fittings or absence of fittings, the nature of binding decor. And we believe that exo-binding technique was the best solution to the problem because it basically imitates binding, even though it is a removable structure. It was used by Yuri Sirov for the first time at the end of the 20th century. But since then, it has been used actively by Grabar Art Restoration Center. So this method has been designed to provide the necessary conditions for the storage of the monument, avoiding unmotivated introduction of new elements. And exo-binding performed the function of natural binding, fixing, protecting, and leaving the monument autonomous. It also visually brings the monument closer to the style of the intended original binding. We also studied the Cyrillic and Serbian books, and we think that our solutions were based on the best solutions. So we used the end band using the boards that has been known since time immemorial, that has been common for the Balkan regions. When we used exo-binding, we used brass, cotton threads, and the leather glue and flour paste. Taking into account the age of this monument and making sure we maintain this manuscript, we understand that we should basically use the digital copy because it's a worldwide trend for such manuscripts, even though it is now available for research again. Thank you, Vera. Are there any questions from the audience? I have a suggestion. Actually, we would like to announce a coffee break, and then you will have a chance to ask questions to Vera in person. Thank you. So we are going to have a coffee break now. On the left, you can see some coffee and tea served, and then please come back. We have a very interesting program. If you want to see this manuscript, the Codex Marianus, you can go downstairs and see it. Thank you. And you can also talk to our sponsors, of course.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon. We are going to our working part of the workshop, and I am ready. I hope you are ready to continue working because we have a very rich program. I would like to say just a few words about the technical problems, about the environment in which we are working. Please don't forget about the protective measures because we have a direct broadcast, so please don't forget about your masks and you understand why they're really necessary. I would like to remind you that there is free Wi-Fi on all our working platforms. So there are logins and passwords, so don't hesitate to use all of them. So we have the plenary session in our program, and we also have a new novelty here. It's interactive living room. This is how we called it. These are posters with the QR codes, and using them you can go and watch the papers of our remote participants, of those who couldn't come but sent their video speeches, and they're very interesting, especially one from Austria, from our Austrian colleagues, which continues the topic of the Codex Marianus, because it is in Austria that 2 pages of our codex are kept. They studied it too, and this is a very interesting and detailed report. Badges, these are permits to enter, and please don't forget them, don't leave them at home, don't forget to take them. So if you looked through the program, all the technical part is on 2 or 3 pages. Please pay attention to them and don't forget to do what is written there. Please don't bring in any printed materials, even your favorite book. If you do it, it will be taken from you and put into the collection, and you will be sorry. Now, about lunch. We have lunch from 2 to 3. Those who would like to have lunch in the canteen, the group dressed, having their coats on, will be met on the threshold of the Pashkov house. When we see a group, we take them to the canteen, the doors to which will be open from the inner yard, and you will have lunch and leave the canteen and then start your activities. Those who don't want to have lunch here, the gates are open and you may use all the nearby restaurants and cafes. From 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we have master classes and workshops. I think that everyone has already registered for at least one of them. There is an address in the program. All master classes moderators have your mobile phones, so if you are not present, they will call you and you won't get lost. Today, on the 6th of April, at 6 o'clock in the evening, we will have the exhibition opening, where you can have a look at the restored Codex Marianus and other items that have already been restored by our experts. And the exhibition is devoted to different materials from which the books were made, non-traditional ones as well, those with which restorers deal. And so from ground zero, you may from ground zero enrich your knowledge. After 6 o'clock in the evening, we have an additional program, lectures, tours, and the School of the Historic Calligraphy opens its doors and is ready to welcome you on the historic calligraphy. So please use this opportunity because these are the 3 days of our seminar. Now at 12, we have a special parallel event, and the leaders, the heads of sectors, divisions, and departments of libraries take part. So those who have already been invited to this event, Alexander is standing in the center of the hall waiting for the group. Please join him and go to the premises of this event. And I'm giving the floor to my colleague, Mrs. Tatiana Kotova. She will be the moderator during our plenary session, and she's going to speak about these presenters and the presentations. I have one replacement, so you will hear from Tatiana. So anyway, I would like to repeat that we are very extremely happy to meet you here. We were missing you, and I hope that we will have great time these 3 days. And so if you have any questions, the people with these badges with the blue stripe, they are organizers. They are always ready to help and resolve any problem you have. So I wish you success and give the floor to Tatiana. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm happy to welcome you. So we start our plenary session, and the first paper is a joint paper by Mrs. Burtseva, candidate of sciences and specialist in technical expertise, Mrs. Litvinova Anna, who is a specialist in technical expertise of art pieces. Both are from Grabar Art Institute, and Mrs. Shenkaryova from the State Museum of Oriental Art. Their paper is Comprehensive Study of Indian Miniature of the 16th Century from the collection of the State Museum of Oriental Art. Do you hear me? Okay. To your attention, I'm offering our paper, Comprehensive Study of the Indian Miniature of the 16th Century from the State Museum of Oriental Art. Before I start my paper, I would like to say a few words about the person who allowed us, forced us to do this work. This is Evgenia Karlova, who left us, very early, but thanks to her great ideas, we got acquainted with this fantastic miniature. And so I devote our work and our speech to her memory. In the collection of our museum, we have a two-sided miniature. On one side, we have a scene of fight of two men. On the reverse side, there is an application of two calligraphic samples, ornament, and two European engravings, Saint Helen and John the Baptist. The calligraphy samples from Hafiz Ghazel and Bustan by Saadi. And there is also a caption and date, Humble Mir Ali, 938 year by the Islamic calendar. The plot of the miniature is a story about two fighters, the master and disciple from Gulistan, Persian poet Saadi. Oops. On the stone, at the roots, it is written, made by Balchand. The miniature calligraphy are in the frame, which is decorated by flower design. This is miniatures from the collection of Mr. Peter Shukin, and it is in his catalog number 30 as a sheet from Persian manuscript of 1521. Unfortunately, the year was given by mistake, and the year is 1532. The formal and stylistic analysis of the miniature allows us to doubt that it was made by the famous Mughal painter Balchand, whose signature is the main attributional sign of his authorship. When we compare his signature with other signatures, it is evident that our sheet was signed by another person. We know a lot of cases when masters made their signatures in very invisible places and in a very small script. Very often these signatures could be done later. By composition, the miniature is close to Persian samples, to the illustrations of Mahmud Muzahib, who worked in 1520, 1560s. However, the clothes and buildings are shown in the style of Tabriz school of the mid-16th century. The caps, the Safavid tages. Safavid tages can be met in Persian masters of the 1660s up to the 70s of the 16th century. There were very many similar elements in the famous work by Mir Sayyid Ali, As Seen at School. These are architectural details, nature, the figures that are close to these miniatures. Some details are similar to the Mughal school. The turban of the governor has a plume and a gret. There is a sword in the typical Indian case. Typical fences can be met in miniatures at the end of the 16th, beginning of the 17th century. However, the fountain, which plays the central role, the central part in the Mughal miniatures, is placed in a typical way. Among the famous works by Balchand, there is only one that is close by composition to our miniature. This is a sheet from Shahnameh, 1610, with the signature of the author in the margins. We have the same architectural background, and the sky is depicted in the same way, but the people are shown differently. For the first time, the name of Balchand was mentioned in 1595, and he was very active up to the end of the 1640s. The fight of the equilibrists was illustrated several times in Gulistan Saadi, from the library of the Palace of Gulistan and Teheran. And there the master illustrated 3 plots, including the story about the fight of 2 fighters. In 1610, 1615, he again started making paintings to the poem by Saadi. Balchand and other painters repainted and decorated old Persian miniatures. His signature is on the sheet from Divan by Navawi from the Royal Library of Windsor. He added to the composition new figures and completely repainted the faces. Well, most probably our miniature is an illustration to Gulistan from the lost or unfinished manuscript. Perhaps it's an early work by Balchand, or a sheet which was written in the co-authorship with other painters, or an illustration repainted by him. So, comparing the work by Balchand, we use the miniatures by other painters and miniatures that imitate the work by Persian and Indian painters. So, as a result, the art analysis shown some controversies, but they had to be added by the physical and chemical analysis and studies of the paintings that could cast light on the time of this miniature was created and compare this information with the published data on Indian miniatures. So part of this research was done by infrared spectral analysis and reflectography, and by the visible luminescence caused by ultraviolet rays. We used the microscope to study the samples of the paint layer. When we were doing this research, we saw that the paint layer is on the surface of the paper. And we have to note that the thickness of this paint layer is not even. The places done by the white color are better glued to the bases than other paints. We have studied 15 samples, almost the whole range of colors of the miniature, analyzed the information and compared it to the benchmarks. And by thus we managed to establish the quality composition of the paint. We saw that ultramarine was used, malachite, lead oxide, sienna was used of different types, brown, yellowish brown, and he used white lead paint for white color. Also, protein adhesive was used for the orange color. So orange flowers were painted by this paint. Different frames were made red using sienna. Almost all painters were mixed with the addition of white lead paint. When dark green paint was used, the author also used some mineral paints. The adhesive is white lead paint. The paper of the miniature is is rich in adhesive. Another place where we found the white lead paint, there is also an vegetable paint, and it is only in a small place in the margins. When we compared the data obtained with the published data, when we analyzed this compared to the technical materials of Persian miniatures, we saw that in our miniature the author used traditional materials. We only have to pay attention to the fact that for yellow paint, the author used lead tin paint, while there are references to ori pigment in literature. It is known that the lead tin paint was used from the 13th century and especially widely in the 15th, 16th century, but it was forgotten by the 17th century. If we speak about the adhesive matters, the animal adhesive was used in the 15th, 16th century, but most often it was gum arabic that was used. When we studied the materials, we added to them the study of the physical-chemical properties of the miniature. We used infrared reflectography with ultraviolet rays. Doing this, we managed to reveal the preparatory author's drawing, which was under the paint layer. All the paintings, all the pictures, all the photos show all the nuances and details when big and small ornaments were made. Sometimes they are very poorly visible. The figures, clothes, caps, different subjects, the tail on the floor. The author's changes were revealed from in the figure in green. It is shown by arrows in the black and white fold where the preparatory sketch was revealed, and you see the changes in the size of the carpet. The figure of the servants when their caps were painted. We also saw some additional things. There were additional things when flowers and trees were painted. The figure of the high-level guest is also special. We had some additional lines. Additionally, when the roots of the tree were decorated, another flower appeared. When we studied the visible luminescence of the ultraviolet area, we saw some scratches, powderings, disruptions, and the traces of restoration interventions. Please pay attention to the different light of the floor on the left and right. It is most probably suggested with the width, with the thickness of the paint layer. The figures of the fighters were also contoured, and they seem brighter than other figures. The same lighting is seen in the tree trunk. The fountain was renovated, so we can suppose that the miniature was repainted, but we haven't found any significant interventions. So, based on these results of the analysis, we can date this miniature by the 15th, 16th centuries, which is factually well coordinates with the conclusions of art critics. Thank you very much for your attention. We haven't finished yet our work because the Balchan's authorship is still under a question. So we are going to continue the research and try to find the expert conclusion on it. But really, you can't even imagine what pleasure it was to study the miniature under the microscope and infrared spectroscopy. Just, well, it's hard even to say how great were the matters. So this study gives you moral satisfaction.
And now I would like to invite Natalia Rebrikova, who is the head of Laboratory for Biological Research of State Restoration Institution, and she's going to tell us about the nature of foxing formation. So foxings, or brown spots, are a common type of damages that we can see in books, manuscripts, atlases, prints, drawings, unpainted linen and cotton fabrics. So the cellulose basis is something that brings these objects together. And the history of research into the causes of their appearance began in the 30s. So it's been 90 years since the scientists study this issue. And there were two versions proposed. One explained the formation by the oxidation of iron particles, rusty spots. And the other one explains it by the development of microorganisms and the formation of yellow-brown metabolites, giving the spots a characteristic color. But both versions proved to be vulnerable as to obtaining evidence to support them. Little iron was found in foxings, slightly more than in the surrounding paper, and mainly in the center of the spots. So a small amount of iron is not enough to cause rust-like stains from contact with metal objects. So it became clear that iron compounds are not responsible for the color of foxing spots. However, the role of transition metals, which include iron and copper, in the formation of foxings is important. We know that bivalent ions are a radical forming center in the process of oxidation of organic substances, while the amount of iron ions may be insignificant. So the researchers indicate the data about the absence of iron compounds in foxings, whereas some other researchers attribute this to the lack of sensitivity of the methods used by the first group of researchers. As a result of microscopic studies, we can see hyphae, conidia, and spores of microscopic fungi were found in foxing spots in greater quantities than in surrounding paper. So a study by fluorescent microscopy and scanning electron microscopy revealed in the spotting zone a few fragments of mycelium, individual condia and spores, but not the accumulation of cells, indicating the development of colonies. Some of the detected fungal hyphae lacked content. They were poorly stained with a fluorescent dye and looked like they had lost their viability. Later, the foxings were examined by scanning electron microscopy, but the scientists didn't really find cell clusters indicating the development of colonies. This was a publication in the magazine Nature. So they used fluorescence and electronic microscopy, but there was no data with regard to cultural studies, microorganisms that could be the reason for the staining of foxing spots. And many researchers said that there was a big risk of contaminants and not microorganisms that could cause this. Also, there is very important data related to nitrohydrin. And this was related to the cellulose oxidation with substances that had amino groups. So they mentioned low speed of foxing formation due to sporadic process. And this is caused by the changing environment. They identify different isolates of fungi, so they, for example, they identified xerophilic forms, and the signs of foxings include slowly developing spots, glowing in ultraviolet light, gradually acquiring a yellow color. So they used those isolated fungi cultures to do this. Later on, at the turn of the 20th and 21st century, scientists proposed another version and presented evidence for the formation of foxings on paper and fabrics from cellulose fibers due to local oxidative destruction of cellulose. And these factors included oxygen availability, the presence of surface contaminants containing metals with variable valence, the contact with more easily oxidizable than cellulose organic components, and products of its oxidation as a result of the oxygen action and light on cellulose fibers. So as a result, a locally proceeding accelerated oxidation process is initiated, and subsequently it can be inhibited when the reactions of chain termination of free radical oxidation begin to prevail over the reactions of its initiation. And at the final stage, cellulose oxidation products containing carbonyl groups enter into a consolidation reaction with free amino groups of amino acids, peptides, proteins in the composition of impurities or sizing, and products of amino carbonyl reaction. So they have strong bonds, so they are stable. And in addition to metal with variable valence, more readily oxidizable compounds, for example, lipids or cellulose oxidation products, cause the appearance of signs of local oxidative destruction. So prolonged contact of slightly oxidized paper with signs of local oxidative destruction in the form of foxins, yellowed edges of the sheets, leads to the appearance of oxidized areas that repeat the shape of the oxidized areas present on the sheet that they contact. So the so-called prints contain low molecular weight cellulose oxidation promoters. And to prove this version of local oxidative destruction, paper acidity measurements were carried out. They also studied different parts of paper, and the determination of pH in the foxing zone and in the surrounding paper showed that in the places of their formation, the paper is always more acidic. And we could identify sulfur, calcium, and this shows that there was a higher level of contaminant in this foxings. I don't want to elaborate on the experiment that they had at the Paper Institute, but they completed this experiment and they demonstrated that those elements contributed into contamination. So by the method of electron probe X-ray spectral analysis, we detected a high content of copper and iron. And using this method of resonance spectrography, we identified that free radicals, iron and copper ions, both in foxing spots and outside of them, were obvious. And this research was conducted on a map that was actually kept in a stack, but the edges of this map were hanging out of the stack, and that's where the intensive formation of foxing started. So using local oxidative destruction method, we can explain the foxings formation in the margins, in the albums, rather than in archive documents, because they are better protected with dust. So we can basically explain their localization, which corresponds to the penetration of light and dust, a higher frequency of occurrence, especially in the margins, and dependence on the paper production technologies. Here, for example, you can see an atlas of the 19th century. Papier plur is used as paper here, so you can see the boundaries both of leaks and foxings, and this can be seen both with natural light and ultraviolet luminescence. And you can see that they are very similar, focusing sports and leagues. So we can see that there are less focusing stains within leagues boundaries. And this is related to the fact that the water-soluble products of cellulose move towards the edges of the leagues. So this oxidation process slowed down as compared to the surrounding paper. We studied xerophile forms of fungi for a long time. For example, Japanese scholars identified the properties of water, and they connected the formation of foxings with the interaction of metabolites produced by fungi and cellulose. But we couldn't really get any growth of xerophile fungi in our conditions, even though we could do it using different materials. We also checked biological version. We did some microscopic studies using fungi and nutrient environment. We identified isolates that could be found on the fibers of paper that are usually part of surface contaminants. So we received pigment spots that looked like foxings, but they were just light aureoles around the stains. And this experiment showed that the limited growth of fungi could lead to the formation of brown spots, but there's another mechanism of their formation, which is dominant. We also checked a version of local oxidative destruction. We used chromatographic paper. Here you can see the sheets of such paper. They are 27 years old, but we used a sheet without any local oxidative destruction. We folded them, we put them together, and we used the paper size 3 by 8 centimeters. And we placed them in Russian State's library at the Department of Manuscripts and Rare Books. So we put them on the shelves in the places that were not protected enough from dust and light. A year later, foxings visible under normal light appeared on those areas of the chromatography paper that were exposed to light and dust. So they were well seen under ultraviolet light. And we could see the first signs of these 3 years after the experiment began, whereas they were invisible under natural light. And a year from the contact with the most oxidized edges of the old rag paper, we could see this spots visible in ultraviolet light. A year later, our experiments came to an end, so our samples were staying there for a year. Afterwards, these samples were put into a laboratory. So 15 years after the beginning of the experiments, fauxines appeared on the chromatographic paper, visible in ultraviolet. And after 10 years, they were visible under natural light. So here you can see what it looked like. And fauxines became more noticeable, those that formed after a year at the library. So this is what it looked like under natural light and under ultraviolet light. So thus we managed to get the fauxine stains. So the fact that they were luminescent in ultraviolet and that they moved from one sheet to another, it confirmed that they had biogenic nature because they seemed live. So they could move from one sheet to another, but this is a very long process. So it means that they have a very slow rate of development. And you know that under ultraviolet light, the edges of the page begin to glow and luminous. And it seemed that we could stop there, but in the recent years, there was another wave of interest in this process due to the development of technologies and new methods. For example, adenosine triphosphate, ATP, was used to measure, and it showed that the fauxines contained more ATP than in the surrounding paper, even though the quantity is not big. And earlier microscopic studies also showed that fauxines had a bigger extent of mycelium and spores than in the surrounding paper. And in the recent years, it has become possible to study the biodiversity of microorganisms without the use of cultural methods. So the species diversity of microorganisms that contaminate historical sites is now studied by molecular biology methods. And the use of metagenomic analysis made it possible to reveal a higher biodiversity in the fauxine zone. We identified prokaryotes in fauxine positive and fauxine negative paper samples. And also the diversity and variety of fungi has been revealed. So metagenomic analysis showed unexpected results. In the fauxine positive sample, they showed the presence of 10 different types of fungi. So Cladonia type, Forma type, yeast were found in the fauxine sample. Aspergillus, Penicillus, they actually accounted only for about 2.7% of all fungi taxonomic units. So cladonia actually are lichen-forming fungi, which require a phototropic symbiont, because lichen is a symbiosis of fungi and weed, seaweed. Speaking about the type of former, they are dark-colored fungi, and they can be extracted from air. So just like other melanin-forming substances, they are contained in air and in the space with light. And thus, these obtained results indicated that contaminant bacteria and fungi contaminants are present in foxings. But they have never formed colonies of xerophilic fungi. So spores, conidia, fragments of mycelium of fungi settle together with dust particles from the air. Or fall from the documents located nearby on which the colonies of microscopic fungi developed earlier. So if we assume that the development of foxings is associated with the penetration of dust, then this can explain the diversity of forms, uneven distribution, and the absence of microorganism cells. Even though Polish specialists think that foxings have biological nature, they don't suggest any special measures to prevent documents from foxings. So basically, they recommend measures that are usually used, like stable microclimate, relative humidity not higher than 60%, protection of objects from light, dust. And I would like to thank my colleagues who helped me to deliver and complete this work. Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you for your interesting report. And now we are going to continue speaking about foxings.
And I am inviting Mrs. Podgornaya from the Russian National Library. She's going to speak about the removal of foxing from paper documents by chemical and light bleaching, comparative analysis. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Let me present the results of our study of the comparative analysis of the removal of foxing from paper documents by chemical and light bleaching. Foxings on paper in documents can be met very often. They reveal in small spots whose color changes from yellow-brown to dark brown. In these places, the paper has lower pH values and less mechanical stability. Foxings worsen the look of the document and their perception. And so these spots are usually deleted in the course of restoration. The standard method is bleaching, as a rule chemical, but for paper that has wood pulp, usually the hydrogen peroxide is used, and chloramine is used for the paper from textile and cellulose fibers. After this, the paper must be thoroughly and long watered to remove the remains of the chemical substances. We think that a good alternative to the chemical bleaching is light, because it implies the minimal intervention into the structure of the document that can be easily controlled. So the purpose of our study was to compare the efficiency of the deletion of foxings from paper by chemical and light bleaching. We studied paper of two types that were different by composition. Later, they will be in our tables denoted as sample number 1 and sample number 2. The first sample are the sheets of the book of 1961, and the second are the sheets of the book published in 1904. The fiber composition was determined using by Ghost on the Leica microscope. The fibers of sample 1 were painted by the Herzberg reactive agent in blue-violet color that allowed us to identify them as cellulose fibers. In the second sample, we had the purple-red color, which showed the presence of a large volume of wood pulp. Paper sample 1 we bleached by the 2% water solution by chloramine B, and also used the acidification by 0.5 water solution of the acetic acid. Sample number 2 was bleached by a 30% water alcoholic solution by hydrogen peroxide. After bleaching, the samples were washed first in the running and then distilled water. For light bleaching, we used a special equipment with blue light diodes. Our equipment was in the form of a panel with 1,200 diodes. After the, under the panel, there was a water tank or the organic glass. The water was treated by the Aquaphor Kuvshin with the module, the filtering model. The temperature was 23 degrees. The samples were bleached in the water tank during 4 hours, 2 hours per side, and after that it was treated during 30 minutes. The efficiency of the bleaching was estimated by the changes in optical characteristics and pH values before and after artificial heat and water aging. The equipment used was the spectrophotometer LRFO, which was used to measure the reflective light, and we also used the delta E light difference. According to the European standard, the changes in color of delta E more than 3 is recognized as visible by the eye. So the more this value is, the more the changes in light are visible. Artificial heat and moisture agent was done in the chamber binder at the temperature of 80 degrees centigrade and a humidity of 65%. pH and brightness were measured before and after 9 days of aging. The experiments had or were made in 5 replications. All the changes are shown in the table. In the result of bleaching sample 1 paper, the brightness increased from 49 to 62%, and the total difference made 8.5 when bleached by chloramine and 8.7 when bleached by light, which allow us to evaluate them as changes visible by eye. After artificial aging, the brightness was decreased by 18%, and after light by 11%. Thus, the dynamics of changing brightness after light bleaching is more effective. It is 4.3 and 4.9 respectively. As a result of bleaching by hydrogen peroxide, the brightness of sample 2 increased from 45 to 62%, and after light bleaching up to 56%. The total color differences were 10.8 after chloramine bleaching and 9.3 after light bleaching, which also indicates a very significant change in color. The dynamics of brightness and lowering, decreasing of brightness is similar in both samples and was estimated as 20%, though the absolute value in sample 2 is higher. The sample after light bleaching loses 12% of brightness, and this is confirmed by higher values of total color differences. You may see on the slide how the test samples looked like before and after bleaching by different methods. So sample 1, we see that after 9 days of artificial aging, the foxings still show on the samples, but their intensity and the intensity of their color after light bleaching is brighter than after chemical bleaching. And the same picture we can see in sample 2. The pH values after bleaching and artificial aging are also shown in the table. After bleaching, the pH value increases up to the neutral value. The dynamics of lowering after artificial aging is lower in the samples after light bleaching. The results showed that the removal of foxings from paper is effective both by chemical and light bleaching. The brightness of paper increases, the visual look of the object is better, and the pH value is almost neutral, though the changes in the brightness and pH samples is slower after light aging. So minding that light bleaching is less deteriorating for the paper and is more effective than chemical. The pandemic influenced our work, so we couldn't be able to evaluate the physical, chemical, and stability qualities of the paper after processing, but we are going on with our work, and we hope that there will be a conference at which we can complement our results with the additional studies. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So now we have reached the moment when our speakers changed. So Alexei Kashev will not be able to speak today. He will speak tomorrow. And now I would like to invite Skola Pavlova, who is a senior restorer at the Museum of the Moscow Kremlin, and she will tell us about medieval bindings. Yes, we are going to talk about bindings. So in my report, I would like to show you the manuscript, which is kept at the Museum of Moscow Kremlin, and I will tell you about the work that was implemented by our workshops in 2018-2019. I'll focus on the binding, about medieval practices of using secondary materials and how the masters of those times worked. So this manuscript represents the service on the day of the appearance of the icon of Tikhvin God's Mother. And it is made on 49 sheets found in brown leather with gold embossing. it was probably designed for Annunciation Cathedral of the Moscow Kremlin, because was the place where the icon of Tikhvin God's mother was kept. So it was created in the later part of the 18th century, and the first mentioning of this manuscript appeared in the inventory of Annunciation Cathedral in 1701, and then it also was mentioned in the inventory of 1745. And here you can see the numbers 48 written in ink. Inside there is a stamp 186, which is similar to the numbers of draft inventories of the Annunciation Cathedral, created by Pomerantsov, probably. So, over the period of its existence, this manuscript never left the Moscow Kremlin, and it wasn't evacuated during the wartime. So this manuscript didn't suffer from use, it suffered from soaking. And its sheets were destroyed because of moisture. Also, the sewing threads were in very poor condition. Some sheets were fallen out. So it was decided to pull out this manuscript, and its block had to be restored. This is what it looks like. So it consists of 49 sheets. It has all leather binding, drawstrings on the front edge, and papers are sewn on paper. The block was sewn with unbleached linen threads on 3 cords, and additionally reinforced on the root part with strips of coarse linen fabric. When we do restoration, we try not to interfere too much with the book structure. We try not to use chemical interference, so we wanted to protect all the functional elements and the binding structure, so that the binding of the 17th century didn't suffer from the restoration works. When we dismantled the flyleaves, we understood that the boards were created using the second-hand leather. In fact, this leather embossing was very unique because it was used rarely. And when we opened it, we could see silver and gold embossing, and basically it was clear that the leather, this leather was used on other books before. So both boards or these covers had similar embossing, but the top cover was better preserved, and the leather was better preserved. So we decided to remove all the contamination and glue, and we were going to use them as covers. We used binoculars to remove all the contaminants. First, we removed glue and organic contamination, as well as wax. And this confirmed that the books were used for church purposes. And we were impressed that the silver was kept so well. So gold and silver were quite well preserved on the leather, and silver embossing was not traditional for Moscow book, although it could be found. And we were sure that such a good condition of silver was due to the fact that it was encapsulated into other kind of leather, and this protected it very well. But then we saw that a very thin film could be extracted from silver. So it could be, well, here you can see this very, very thin, really subtle film on top. And it was clear that it was not wax, because wax had amorphous structure, whereas this layer actually had this film structure and the relief of the place from where it was removed. So the film was quite strong, and it was very difficult to crease. But under the impact of water, they could be, easily disintegrate. We were really interested in this, and we understood that the masters that worked in the 17th century knew the properties of silver, and they wanted to preserve their work so that it could be used for many years. At first, such a film could be found only on metal, but while we did all the cleaning, we saw that metal pieces were coated with varnish, but it's obvious that the binders that worked in the 17th century could not do it like that. So we continued our cleaning process. So we found such a film in other places. Probably the film was kept there and appeared there in different places. We used electronic scanning, we used X-ray spectral analysis, and it turned out that the foil particles on the embossing were of double nature, with thick bottom layer of silver and a thin top layer of gilding. So the studies of the composition of those thin films showed that the films disintegrated into small particles under the influence of water. Protein color reaction was positive, and judging from the elasticity of film and transparency of it, we could assume that the skin of a yarn element was used for binding. And we got a pale pink sample when we studied the film, but some film actually gave white color, so it was due to gluten glue that the masters used. So basically we can say that the bookbinder covered the covers with a thin layer of gluten glue, which protected the silver from patination, and the bases for the covers were the fragments of the binding leather removed from the top covers of two different books of a larger format, cut in half and glued together on the cleaned leather. The decor consisted of border mass of floral ornamentation, and a typical example of the decor for the binding of books could be found among the books printed and bound at the Moscow printing house. And also for the ornamentation of such bindings was characteristic of that time. Another characteristic feature of the binding of the printing house was the introduction into the composition of the decoration of the upper cover of the title, the short title of the book. And this title was divided into two parts and placed in the margins. Different letters, A, C, D, and D. And it's known that the workshops of the printing house produced quite many editions, and then the publishing mass binding were bound for the king or members of the royal family, as well as for the metropolitan or highest clergy. So those bindings were distinguished by special care, and they were luxuriously decorated, so they used silver or gold embossing, and the edges were covered with gold. Probably it was very expensive to get the cardboard, and that's why the binder used those materials. So this binding gives a lot of examples, and it shows how masters of the past tried to save the materials, tried to use the materials several times. So here you can see the embossing and the binding. The block consisted of different kinds of paper, 4 types of filigree letters, and it looked as if they collected different pieces in order to create this book. There was some misalignment of the pages. We thought that they just, fell out due to that, but during restoration works, when we stitched the book again, we saw that the paper were outside from the cover, and I guess the binders thought it was okay at that time. The flyleaf was of a smaller size. It had a different size as to the protective straps. They were created in the 17th century, and the cords were different. The leather on the bottom cover was patched. The decorations were different. 2 frames, one on top of another. The bottom frame is created using blind embossing, and the lines have different thickness. And the top frame is embossed with gold, and the lines are of the same size and the thickness. They used large cliche. You can see these ornaments, the flower in the central medallion, which is used also in the corners of the frame. Then there is a mesh on the bottom, and the central line was a thicker line with 2 thinner lines around it. And the instruments were similar, so the width of line was the same. When we thought about this decoration and the use of it, we thought that maybe they again used a second-hand leather, so they used it repeatedly. It was very interesting to think about the authors of this binding. You know, this economical attitude to bookbinding materials usually attributed to monastery bookbinding. And as to the type of embossing on the bottom cover, it corresponds to the embossing of bindings created at the Chudovsky monastery, because they had their own bookbinding workshop. And Klepikov, when he described Chudovsky monastery bindings, he mentioned characteristic techniques for decorating the covers: blind embossing with a grooving plane, and special rhombuses with diamond shapes. So later on, bindings were characterized by increasing number of diamond shapes. And we thought that maybe this binding was created at Chudovsky monastery. We cannot confirm this yet. We continue our research work. Probably some changes might happen, and we started researching the bindings received from Chudovsky monastery. In fact, you probably understand how difficult it is to find the right binding from the basis, from the database. So it was very difficult to carry out our research during the last year, and we haven't yet finished the restoration of protective inner straps. We took them out and we decided not to put them back so far. Hopefully, after we finish the restoration of the other documents, we'll get more information and we'll understand where this was created. Usually, the bindings were created after the manuscripts were created at the monastery scriptoriums, at the monasteries, or at the royal court. But probably it was not done at the royal court because it's not luxurious enough. So, in fact, the binding seems quite ordinary, and that's why it is not something of interest for great researchers. But, you know, once you start working on these materials, you get involved into it, and it becomes very interesting. So we could identify a lot of technical peculiarities of binders' works. The binders of the Moscow print house of the 17th century and the binder who created this manuscript that we have at our museum. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Nadezhda. There are questions as far as I can see.
Собственно, была изготовлена такая реставрационная неграндиозная коробочка.
We made a box for restoration and we fixed it there. So we tried to limit the movement, but it is kept in the ordinary condition. We thought it wouldn't be very dangerous. But you have a casing. Yes, we have a casing, but it's just a case to protect. it for the purpose of restoration. But the fact that these sheets come out of the edge, we decided not to tie these ties. But I guess they were fixed in some way or another. Because, for example, if these ties were bound, then the sheets would be damaged. But we didn't see any damages in the places of these ties. I guess they were not used. Thank you, Nadezhda. Well, we have to stick to timeline. Each speaker has only 10 to 15 minutes.
And now I give the floor to Mrs. Natalia Palomar, who is high category restorer and the head of the Laboratory of Document Restoration from the Russian Academy of Sciences archive. She's going to speak about the manuscript heritage preservation issues. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference who not for the first year have been offering us this fantastic opportunity to share our best practice and learn a lot of new things from the world of restoration. I would also like to say that I applaud to the work that was done by the library on the Codex Marianus restoration. So my applause, yes, my high applause, because the level was, fantastic, and the document is so special of the 11th century. And another very brief piece of information is that the Academy of Sciences, in which I'm working in the archive, is very active in making programs and projects on cooperation with research institutions, foreign restoration institutions, including this is Austria, Mongolia, and India. And we are very active in cooperation with the former USSR countries. So we have money for this, so I invite everybody to live in friendship and to cooperate in our mutual projects. I will leave my card here, and it has my email and phone on it, so we will be very glad to cooperate. Now, going back to my paper, I would like to share with you my, very rich experience of work with vellum documents. It so happened in my life that more than 300 documents have been restored by my hands. These are not only valuable documents, these are the documents of the history of the Russian state. And so each document had to be very carefully treated, very thoroughly studied scientifically, and thoroughly selected the methods to choose the programs for their further conservation. There is a very interesting group of monuments. It has already been said about manuscripts and books, but I would like to draw your attention to another group. These are manuscript missive letters, diplomas, and privileges. And their special value and significance was noted immediately at the time of their creation, because they were made on a very stable and expensive material, vellum or parchment. Unfortunately, there are no methodological recommendations on how to restore these especially valuable documents. Well, this is so happens in life. What has already been published, these are recommendations of the Grabar Restoration Center, are inapplicable to vellum documents. And first of all, it can be attributed to water processing. The fact that chalk worked into the vellum changes its optical characteristics when in contact with water and changes its look. The surface, when contacting water, loses its velvet nature and becomes more transparent, and this is an irreversible process. And for us, it is very important to conserve these documents in their original form, with their velvet nature, very beautiful combination of ink and paper. And so water processing is something awful. It is excluded absolutely. It is also very important to understand what happens to such stable material as vellum. Why does it start to disintegrate? Originally, it was very stable, good, long-living, and fantastically good. But it was very well adapted to the conditions of natural and smooth oscillations of temperature and humidity. Please pay special attention to this. Smooth variations in temperature and humidity. But the repeated, violent changes in our book storages, summer, winter, spring, autumn, central heating, we have very big jumps in temperature and humidity, and this results in over-drying of the basis of the document, and bound water leaves the document on the molecular level. It deformates, it has folds, and the linear changes lead to the disintegration of the paint layer. So, such a small thing as non-observance of humidity and temperature mode, we have all the problems on the vellum documents. Deformation of vellum is the main reason, and so we have to be very particular, very strict, and follow the temperature and humidity mode. This is absolutely essential for long-term conservation of these documents. But when we have the already dried, deformed vellum, when we have to improve it, we have to moisturize it, and how can we do it? How can we return water to it? We can put the document into a special chamber to be rich with cold water vapor. This chamber is a very expensive thing, and unfortunately, we have to take into account that vellum in this chamber, in order to be saturated with water and strengthen, must stay for a rather long time, from 10 hours and more. The thing is that the manuscripts are very old, and there is a lot of dust and dirt on their surface, with a lot of fungus and bacteria spores. But they are not living. When they are dry, everything is all right with them. But when they stay in this moisturizing chamber for a long time, provokes their development, because to saturate the vellum with water, we need higher moisture, higher humidity of air, and higher temperature. And so in this humid environment, microorganisms become living. So after this moisturizing in the chamber, we have to conduct the disinfection processes with this document, and this is a very serious process for today. So please be aware that the chamber is expensive and beautiful, but as a fact, that the simplest way of remote humidification with a filtering paper, with a film, is more applicable if we want to preserve the document for a long time. Additionally, this remote humidification of the vellum, in the process of remote humidification, we have partial regeneration of the paint layer and ink. And this powdering, which we notice on over-dried documents, can be very easily ignored and, stopped by this remote humidification. Then, when we straighten the vellum, we have to dry it correctly. And here I would like to draw your attention to the fact that plain materials with plain surfaces can't be used. We can't use plain paper, films of any kind, because our main task is to preserve the velvet characteristics, the velvet nature of vellum. So to dry it, we have to use woolen cloth. Yes. And in this cloth, vellum dries, becomes straightened out, but there are the same traces of printing boards with different seals closed by some paper custodia. So everything is very delicately served. The nature, the characteristics of the document are preserved. So we have to dry vellum correctly, but also we need to stabilize the material. It means that vellum documents, after being straightened out and dried in the press, also mind that you can't press or compress the document because very hard, because you have to preserve the fantastic surface of the document. So pressing is very slightly pressed, and after that there must be the stabilization process. This is at least 2 weeks when this vellum must stay under the press. Though it seems to be straightened out and dry, if it is not there for 2 weeks, it will try to go back to the former deformed state, and so 2 weeks are a minimum time, and nothing can be devised here. After straightening and drying the document, and after the stabilization process, we can check the condition of the paint layer. Only in this sequence, paint layer only after straightening, because in the process of remote moisturizing, there goes a slight regeneration of the paint layer. It is seen absolutely with the eye. It is visible. And then we have to work with the document using a microscope. So on the initial stage of the disintegration of the paint layer, may see only under microscope. It is not visible. And for us, it is important to do the restoration operations with a very slight, very careful interference. Well, in general, the paint layer on vellum documents is tempera paintings in the absolutely clear original state. Please note that all tempera paintings that we have in our history, iconography was covered by lacquer or drying oil, and every 8 years this layer was getting darker, became non-transparent, and the people had to clear it away and put it on again and again. So there were many interferences on the paint layer, and on vellum layer they're absolutely original, really original, and the beauty is fantastic under microscope. So this strengthening of the paint layer must be done only if it is necessary. And we can do it only locally on the margins of some losses, breaks and peelings. So please note that a lot of European methods recommend that we work on the surface with spray methods. That's absolutely impossible because the original temporal layer can't be covered completely, even by the finest film. I think it's impossible. Let's stick to the green development line and try to use environmentally friendly working processes, not to harm the environment and the documents that we work with. Well, strengthening the paint layer must be done by the parchment adhesive of very low concentrations. There were studies made some 15 and 20 years ago when the people came to the conclusion that natural adhesives have higher rigidity. But these studies, if we go into detail, were not correct enough. They had very thick and concentrated films. And when we work with vellum, we have to use vellum adhesive from 1.5 to 3%. These are absolutely different films, and they behave differently. To strengthen this layer, this vellum adhesive must be with a fine brush applied on the margins of the losses and peelings. It is inserted locally only where it is really vitally needed. It's very easy to work with this adhesive without any problems. And if it is necessary, I can speak about it separately. The next stage is cleaning the vellum from surface dust. And here, the usage of such materials as rubber crumb is impossible because it remains in the vellum. Different chemical solvents, impossible, because we can't trace how this solvent will interact with the paint layer or with all the things in the vellum. So for all documents, only mechanical cleaning with a very fine lancet on the surface. So what is possible must be taken away, and what is not must be left. Then we have to complete the losses. And my idea is to use the Japanese restoration paper of a special series which was specially programmed for vellum, and adhesive on the basis of the wheat starch. It's a 10% concentration adhesive, so by a semi-dry method, these gluing, attaching could be done. So the best parchment adhesive and different materials will cause very hard bindings, and we don't know how they will affect the material itself. So these works on the strengthening of the paint layer must be very careful, and then we have to make an individual case for these documents. And so there was a very interesting question from the audience. What happened to this document after restoration? Yes, a special case is needed from stable materials. They should be acid-free, and they shouldn't change in time. So special individual casing from stable material is vitally important. It must allow us to conserve, to keep the document in the case so that all these components, the pending seals, the copies, different pages, were very comfortably placed in this case. This is from my experience and from the studies that I do every time I have to restore a document. I have a video, but perhaps everything is already clear without even this video. Maybe very quickly we can just look through. You see, this is a document, a missive letter on the vellum. You see there are 4 holes, and it's impossible to close them because these are the remains of the pending seals. The next, the condition of the paint layer. Well, this is a missive letter in the cover, and everything seems to be very nice. But under microscope, you see how this paint layer is disintegrating. This is a missive letter with a pending seal. It is very beautiful, massive, and heavy. And for such documents, we have to create a special case where all these elements were kept comfortably without any special damage to the document. This is a missive letter with a very vulnerable seal under custody. This is a small paper that protects this seal from disintegration, from destruction. And very often it turns out that the seal is lost, but the condition of the custody is very good. So everything must be very carefully preserved. Another very interesting missive letter with a pending seal at the bottom of a very thin document. So for it not to tear the document in parts, it has this protective layer, very carefully cut. It is functional and necessary. If it is lost, we have to think of something else because this seal may tear the document apart. Let's go on. This is deformation. These are samples of careless, very incorrect preservation when the seal was just right on the text. Another picture shows the paint layer, and its disintegration was as a result of folding the paper. And so it was folded several times and then rolled and then put into a case. So, of course, they all must be unfolded. So, again, this is an example of how the paint layer is being disintegrated. So I think, this is the equipment that we use in our laboratory, but still another slide shows, no, the previous one. A photo of the documents in the individual cases. No, okay. Well, thank you very much for your attention. Yes, thank you. Well, I'm very sorry that we are limited in time. We can listen to you endlessly, but...
Now I would like to invite Evgenia Mimrina, who is the restorer of the highest category, working at the Grabar Art Restoration Center. She's going to talk about the treasures of Archangel Raphael, and she's going to talk about the specific features of underwater archaeology objects. Good afternoon, colleagues. Yes, I would like to share our experience, and it's quite extraordinary. This was our joint project with Russian Geographical Society and the Center of Underwater Research. They discovered the ship that was built in 1693 and it got lost in 1724. It was a German ship, Archangel Raphael. So Russian Geographical Society has different exhibitions trying to get different objects and ships from the bottom of the sea. And of course it's a complex work. Here you can see the stages of underwater archaeological works. They work with different specialists and experts, and these are the conditions where they have to work. So a sunk ship has a whole number of different artifacts. First of all, they are objects used by sailors. And it's very surprising that in addition with textile and metal, they still can find different eco-factors like grains and vegetables. And in 2017, they found this ship with a mass of grain and other things. When they brought this object to the surface, they realized that there was an eel and there was a book underneath it. So they delivered this book in a special box from St. Petersburg to Moscow, to Grabar Art Restoration Center. So we had to think what we could do. First of all, it was related to the method of drying. We studied different methods that exist nowadays. Different cameras like vacuum cameras, sublimation cameras, chambers, and all these methods are based on very dramatic temperature changes, whereas this book had already lots of difficulties in its process of existence. It was underwater for 300 years. Another thing was that all these processes took place in the closed chamber, so it would be difficult to stop this process. We understood that on the one hand, we had to take an individual approach to each object. We had to carry out a wide scale of research, but we didn't have a lot of time because the book changed its natural condition of storage, so we had to make a prompt decision with regard to the restoration methods so that we could protect this book and prevented it from further aging. Here you can see what this book looked like after we separated it from the eel's body. And in fact, as you can see, the condition of sheets preservation was quite satisfactory. We think that it was due to Baltic water. It has low level of salt, so it worked as a natural conservant or preservant. It had a very low level of oxygen, which was good for the book. We used different brushes, and we started opening pages and removing different sedimentation levels up to the middle of this section. Then we discovered stitching, and we captured it graphically, and thus we began to separate each page from each other. Then we had other work related to removing different particles of quartz and clay that got stuck deeply into the structure of the paper. At first we used mechanical cleaning, but as to deeply rooted particles, they were very difficult to remove, and that's why we used ultrasound bath. This helped us to intensify the cleaning process, and it also helped to desalinate this book. So we did this with all the sheets, we removed all the contamination, and then we started pasting the sheets. We used paper cast methods. This was just the part of the book. We decided not to bind it yet. We wanted to add sheets, and we identified this book. It is Luther Bible, and we attached the threads that the book was stitched with. This Bible is the gem of the collection, so we thought we wouldn't work with such objects because it was a very rare artifact. But the expedition that took place in 2019 provided us with another extraordinary object. This is a psalm book of the 17th century in the German language. This book was well preserved. The leather had very good embossment. It had the end piece and the clasps. Using our experience with the previous book, we decided to wash it out without unstitching the book, without pulling it open. And then we used convective drying methods mixed with filtered drying using filter paper. So the cords were strengthened with similar threads. We extended them, then we put together the first and the last signatures. We restored the end band, and finally we put it all together. As to the wood restoration, we approached the restorers that work with wet wood, so they dried these parts. They used isopropylene of higher concentration, and they used acetone and Polaroid and putting it under press. Speaking about our work with leather, we used SPAG methodology using low molecular solution. We started with 10% solution up to 20% pollution with follow-up freezing. This is what this book looks like after the restoration process. It took us quite a long time to discuss what we should do with these clasps. We realized that it was important to reconstruct them, so we reconstructed these elements based on the existing similar books. And it helped us to preserve the handwriting with its relief. Of course, the pandemic imposed its own limitations. We wanted to exhibit this work in Hamburg at the Museum of Underwater Archaeology, but this exhibition was postponed. It didn't take place. We should always look on the bright side. So in 2020, the Geographical Society had another exhibition, and they brought two more pieces.
которой мы сейчас работаем, она находится в процессе.
So now this process is underway. We are working on this book. We are using the same methodology that we used before. So in this case, we dismantled this book and we work with each individual sheet separately. We are now working on the binding materials, trying to find similar kinds of binding. So this was another book, the big book that we're working with. It was discovered that this book was published by the heir of Philip Nikolai, and he was serving at the place not far from Hamburg, the place where the exhibition was to take place. So our German colleagues are looking forward to seeing our work. So you can see the volume of damages. So here you can see this coating. This is parchment. It was purple initially. We have straightened it, and it was surprising to see the embossing on the middle part and the title page that we started working with in order to understand where it was printed. It was printed in 1610, and the ship was built in 1693. It means that the book appeared almost 100 years earlier than the ship itself. And here you can see the scholar who was working in Hamburg. So that's what we did. There were lots of sediments.